He rode into the valley looking for a place to die. Instead, he found an abandoned farm. But when he pushed open the door, he discovered a shocking secret. 3 beautiful women were already living there, and they were guarding something worth killing for. Ethan Cole was a ghost, haunted by a past he couldn't outrun. The Texas sun in 1889 was merciless, baking the Rio Verde Valley into a cracked, dusty wasteland. It was a good place to disappear, a good place to be forgotten. His horse was bone-weary, and Ethan was one step past that. He was looking for a final stop, a place to let the silence finally win. He saw it on a low rise, crooked against the bleeding sunset. An abandoned farm. The fences were down. The barn leaned like a drunkard. The house itself was a skeleton picked clean by the wind. It was perfect. A tomb with a view. He swung down from his horse, his boots sinking into the dust. This was it. The end of the line. He reached for the warped wooden door, ready for the emptiness inside. But then he heard it. Faint, like a memory. The sound of laughter. His hand froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. A cold dread washed over him. This wasn't an abandoned farm. It was a trap. He drew his Colt, the worn metal cool against his sweaty palm, and pushed the door open. The sight that met his eyes stole the breath from his lungs. It wasn't a trap. Not the kind he expected. 3 women stood in the center of the decaying room. One was tall, with dark hair and eyes that held the storm. Another had eyes like ice, her stance a challenge. The youngest watched him with a quiet intensity that was unnerving. They weren't afraid. They were rooted to this place, like ancient trees. And they were staring at him like he was the one who had just stumbled into a cage. "You shouldn't be here," the tall one said, her voice low and steady. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. Ethan lowered his pistol, but his hand never strayed far from the grip. "Just looking for shelter?" he said, his voice a rusty croak. "Didn't know the place was claimed?" The woman with eyes like ice stepped forward. "This land is dangerous. You need to leave, before it's too late." Her words were sharp, meant to cut. But Ethan had been cut by experts. He looked past them, at the decaying walls, the shattered furniture. Why stay in a place like this? The question hung in the air. The women exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, the youngest one spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Because it's ours." Ethan had seen that look before, in the eyes of settlers clinging to a patch of dirt that had already cost them everything. It was the look of defiance, the look of people with nothing left to lose. He stepped outside, needing air. The setting sun cast long, skeletal shadows across the yard. That's when he saw it. The barn wall was riddled with holes, not from rot, from bullets. Dozens of them. A story of a one-sided fight written in splintered wood. His gaze followed a faint path leading away from the barn. It ended in a small, lonely clearing. 3 rough wooden crosses stood there, leaning in the wind. Unmarked. Forgotten. The women had followed him out. They stood behind him, their silence a heavy blanket. "Our father," the tall one Ilara said, "and our 2 brothers." She told him the story, of a dream built from sweat and hope, a farm carved from the wild. And then the strangers came, men with greed in their eyes, led by a monster named Silas Kane. They didn't just want the land, they wanted to erase the family that stood on it. "They left us with nothing," the second sister Lyra said, her voice hard as flint. "Nothing but this ruin. They think we'll break. They think we'll run." The youngest Calla looked at the graves. "So we laugh," she whispered. "It's the only thing they can't take from us." Ethan looked from the graves to the women. He had come here to bury his own ghosts. He hadn't expected to find someone else's. The urge to ride away was a physical pull. This wasn't his fight.
Their ghosts weren't his to carry. He took a step toward his horse, and then the ground trembled. A low, distant thunder that wasn't thunder at all. Hoofbeats. Alara's face went pale. They're coming back. Ethan looked at the horizon. A line of riders, dark against the dying sun. He looked at the three women, standing their ground, ready to face the storm. He had a choice. Ride away and be a ghost forever, or stay and fight. He turned away from his horse and drew his Colt. "Get the rifles," he said. The riders fanned out, their silhouettes sharp against the burning sky. There were 10 of them, moving with the lazy confidence of predators who knew their prey was trapped. Ethan and the sisters moved with a grim purpose.
He showed them how to use the crumbling stone wall of a pigsty for cover. They showed him the loose floorboard in the barn where their father had hidden the last of his ammunition. This wasn't a fight about land anymore. It was a last stand. The leader, a big man with a cruel scar across his face, rode forward. Ethan recognized the type, a bully who enjoyed the fear he created. "Ladies!" the man called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "We've come to collect the deed to this fine property, or you can pay us another way." His men laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Ethan stepped out from behind the barn, his rifle held steady. "This property ain't for sale," he said, his voice carrying in the still air. The leader's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected this. A drifter with a spine. "Who the hell are you?" "Just a man passing through," Ethan replied. "And you and your men are trespassing." The outlaw's face twisted in rage. "Kill him!" he snarled. The world exploded in gunfire. Ethan dove back behind the barn as bullets chewed at the wood. The sisters opened fire from the pigsty, their shots surprisingly accurate. One of the riders screamed and tumbled from his horse. The fight was chaos. Dust and smoke choked the air. The screams of men and horses mixed with the constant crack of rifles. Ethan moved like a ghost, using every shadow, every piece of cover. This was a language he knew, the grim mathematics of battle. He saw Lyra take a hit, her arm jerking as a bullet grazed her. She cried out but didn't stop shooting. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had something the outlaws didn't. They were fighting for a home. As darkness fell, the outlaws pulled back, leaving 3 of their own dead in the dirt. But it wasn't a retreat. It was a regrouping. They would be back, and they would come with fire. Inside the dark cabin, Ethan patched Lyra's arm. The wound was clean, but she was pale. Ilara and Calla stood watch at the broken windows, rifles in hand. "They won't risk another charge in the dark," Ethan said. "They'll try to burn us out at dawn." Ilara looked at him, her eyes dark with a fear she refused to voice. "We can't win this." "Maybe not," Ethan admitted, "but we can make them pay for every inch." He looked around the small, ruined cabin. "This Silas Kane. Why this farm? There's better land a mile down the river." "Our father found something," Calla whispered from the window. "He wouldn't tell us what. Just that it would make us rich, that it was a secret worth dying for." Just then, Lyra, delirious with pain, began to murmur. She clutched at a small leather pouch tied around her neck, one Ethan hadn't noticed before. "The heart," she mumbled. "Papa said to protect the heart of the farm." Ethan gently untied the pouch. Inside wasn't a jewel or a gold nugget. It was a rock. A strange, heavy black rock that seemed to drink the lamplight. It was oily to the touch. He held it up. He'd seen rock like this once before, years ago. A wildcatter had shown him a sample, his eyes gleaming with mad hope. It wasn't just a rock. It was oil shale. Black gold. The farm wasn't just a farm. It was sitting on a fortune. And Silas Kane was the only one who knew. The realization hit Ethan like a physical blow. This wasn't a land grab. It was a heist. Silas hadn't just killed their father. He had tortured him, trying to find the source of the shale. and now he was back to finish the job. As the first gray light of dawn touched the sky, they saw them. The outlaws were coming, carrying torches. "It's time," Ethan said, his voice grim. He looked at the rock in his hand, then at the half-empty barrel of kerosene by the stove. A desperate, insane plan began to form in his mind. A plan that would either save them all, or get them burned alive. "They want a fire," Ethan said, his voice a low growl. "We'll give them one." The plan was madness born of desperation. He had Lyra, her good arm steady, and Alara post up in the loft of the leaning barn. Calla, the youngest and fastest, was hidden in the root cellar beneath the cabin, the heavy door propped open just a crack. Ethan's job was the most dangerous. He took the oily black rock and the can of kerosene. He crept out the back of the cabin, circling around to the dry well that sat in the middle of the yard. It was their father's first attempt at finding water, a deep stone-lined pit that had yielded nothing but dust. The outlaws were advancing slowly, torches held high, their faces grim in the pre-dawn light. They expected a firefight. They weren't expecting a trap. Ethan worked fast. He poured a trail of kerosene from the cabin door to the well, then another from the barn. He dropped the oil shale into the bottom of the well, then doused it with the rest of the kerosene. The dry well was now a bomb. He took his position behind the broken-down wagon, his Colt in his hand, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He could see the sisters in the barn loft, two determined silhouettes against the gray sky. Silas Kane and his men reached the edge of the yard. "Last chance!" Silas roared. "Come out, or we burn you out!" Silence was his only answer. "Fine," Silas sneered. "Have it your way." He gestured, and two of his men ran forward, throwing their torches onto the roof of the cabin. The dry shingles caught instantly. Flames licked up the side of the house. This was it. "Now!" Ethan screamed. From the barn loft, two rifles cracked. The two outlaws with the torches dropped. From the root cellar, Calla burst out, a lit lantern in her hand. She didn't hesitate. She threw it with all her might. It sailed through the air in a perfect arc and landed right on the kerosene trail leading from the cabin. The world erupted in a sheet of fire. The kerosene trail ignited with a whoosh, a river of flame racing across the yard. The outlaws screamed, caught by surprise. The fire hit the well, and the oil-soaked rock inside exploded. A pillar of black smoke and fire shot into the sky. The blast threw men and horses in every direction. It was a vision from hell. Through the smoke and chaos, Ethan moved. He was no longer a drifter. He was a soldier. He fired his Colt with cold, methodical precision. Men who weren't burned were shot. Silas Kane, his clothes smoldering, staggered to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He saw Ethan through the smoke and let out a roar, drawing his own pistol. The two men fired at the same time. Pain, white-hot and searing, exploded in Ethan's side. He stumbled, but didn't fall. Silas did. He clutched his chest, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. He looked down at the hole, then up at Ethan, a look of pure shock on his face. Then he crumpled to the ground. The fight was over. The surviving outlaws were fleeing into the morning light. The cabin was burning, a funeral pyre for the past. The sisters ran to him. Alara and Calla helped him to his feet, while Lyra, her own arm bandaged, pressed a rag against the bleeding wound in his side. "You're hurt," Alara said, her voice shaking. "I'll live," Ethan grunted, leaning on them. He looked at the burning cabin, then at the oil-blackened smoke still rising from the well. "You're rich," he said. They looked at him, then at each other, and for the first time, a real smile touched their faces. They had lost their home, but they had won back their future. As the sun rose higher, they stood together in the ruins, 4 survivors bound by fire and blood. The past was ashes, and from those ashes, Something new was about to be built. They buried the dead and tended to their wounds. The burning cabin was a smoking ruin, but the barn, scarred and battered, still stood. It would be their home for now. The oil well, the source of all their pain, and now their salvation, was a blackened pit in the ground. News of the discovery, and of Silas Kane's death, would bring a different kind of trouble. Lawyers, businessmen, opportunists, but they would face it together. A few days later, as Ethan rested, his side bandaged tightly, Alara sat with him. "Why?" she asked, the question she'd been holding since the day he arrived. "Why did you stay?" Ethan looked out at the valley, at the land that was now blooming with possibility. "Because I was tired of running," he said simply. "I came here looking for a place to be forgotten. Instead, I found a reason to be remembered." She laid her hand on his, her touch gentle. "This is your home now, Ethan Cole, if you want it." He looked at her strong, beautiful face, and saw not just a partner in a fight, but a partner in life. He saw a future he had stopped believing in. A family. Peace. "I want it," he said, and his voice was steady and sure. The farm wasn't abandoned anymore. It was alive with the sound of hammers and saws as they began to rebuild. It was alive with the quiet laughter of three sisters and the steady presence of a man who had finally stopped running. He hadn't found the silence he was looking for. He had found something much better. A home. If you enjoyed this story of a man who found redemption in the heart of a fight, hit that like button and let us know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable tales of the American West. We'll see you in the next one.